Here's the crazy thing that I always find amusing is that there's a lot of people who write on the internet about the UFO phenomenon, and the one thing that seems to tick them off the most is the idea that there would be some central body that would police. You hear this a lot. Oh, we can't have a central body that would police the ufology. Well, I have news for you, folks. You already have it. The advocates of the extraterrestrial hypothesis, they are the de facto cardinals of the ETH church, as far as I'm concerned. And so when we talk about religion, I wrote in my review of the book that Mac was a revolutionary, and I compared him to somebody that your listeners probably won't know about, but a guy named Henry Allen, who was an evangelical in Nova Scotia, the Maritimes, in the late 18th century. What Allen did, he was faced with a very rigid, formalized congregational church that was very Calvinist in its outlook. And he said, look, I stress the personal experience with God. And they called him a new light because he said, none of these things that you've created, these things about baptism and stuff, none of that matters. All that matters is a personal experience with God. It was a revolutionary kind of thing. Within 20 years, his new light sort of philosophy had been turned into the Baptist church. You know, the mainstream religions had co-opted it, taken out all of the radical stuff, and just focused in on the things that they could use. And my question to you, Greg and Nick, is, do you think that the same thing could happen to Mac's idea? Because I've already seen on the internet people talking about the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis and saying, well, of course, he's on it. This is absolutely it. This is the right answer. And I think Mac, if he was here, would be horrified that anybody would say that he had come up with the right answer.
Of course he would be horrified. He said many times in the book that I'm playing with ideas here. This is a thought experiment. However, I did tell him over the years as we spoke and over the months leading up to the release of the book, and he would just not accept it. He was too modest. I said, you know what I think is going to happen with this book is that a few people will notice it. There will be some talk about it. It'll cause a stir for a few months. And then in the months and the years and I suppose the decades after it, people coming into the field will read it and say, you know, why hasn't anybody said this before? This is incredible. Why don't more people know about this? And that, you know, that may start some sort of turnover in what people do when they get into the UFO field and what they concentrate on and what kind of questions they ask. What Mac's doing with the book is asking questions that haven't been asked before and offering some cautious, tenuous explanations, hoping that other people will, one, read it, and two, expand on his ideas. I think he was kind of saying, hey, everybody, this stuff is around. It's been around for a while, these ideas that he has. Why don't you take a look at it and run with it? And I think that's what the contribution of the book is.
We did discuss alternative theories back in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
And then they die off. And then suddenly we're no longer talking about the alternative theories. You wake up one day and it's back to ETH, and you think about the cycles here. And the unfortunate thing here is we have this great work here. We have someone who unfortunately is no longer around to expand it, and we hope that people like you will be able to expand these ideas and come up with more theories, more suggestions of what to investigate and how. But maybe 20 years from now, they'll just be reading Donald Kehoe all over again, and that will be the way and the truth.
God, I hope not. I mean, I'm hoping that that's not the case. If you look at these, what was the book? Thomas Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolutions. I think at the end of it, his conclusion was basically the people that are pushing the old theories that don't want to let go of them have to essentially die off before new ideas can come. I'm hoping in my most optimistic times that that's what will happen with Mac's book and other books that are similar to it that people generally ignore, like Greg Little's books or Jim Brandon's one book on the subject, The Rebirth of Pan, which share a lot of themes, ideas, theories with Mac's.
You know what's ironic about that is that Stan Friedman, in almost all of his lectures, uses that line to bolster the extraterrestrial hypothesis. He says, it's actually in my film, Stan T. Friedman is Real. I have him saying it to somebody at a conference, saying, you know, it was Max Planck. In order for scientific progress to take place, the people that held the old ideas kind of have to die off. And in a weird sense of irony, they have become the orthodoxy. And in a field, two things that strike me as always funny. One, it's how can you have an orthodoxy where you don't know the answer. I mean, the UFO phenomenon is a mystery. It's weird. It's fun. You know what? Frankly, it's a little wacky sometimes too. And I think it's a very reductionist approach that is very human of us to, I think the extraterrestrial hypothesis, ironically, is the most human hypothesis of all of them, because it's not really about what the answer is. It's about what we want the answer is to be, and what we can wrap our minds around. And that's it. That's what most people can wrap their minds around. Whereas you get a guy like Mac, who's flying out there, he's going out in the edges. And Nick, I'm going to throw this one to you. I'm just going to read the last thing that he wrote in the book before he has one thing about our own future. But he writes this: if we're dealing with a truly alien intelligence, there's no promise that its thinking will be linear. Indeed, its inherent weirdness might serve as an appeal to an aspect of the psyche we've allowed to atrophy. It might be trying to rouse us from our stupor, in which case it's tempting to wonder if the supposed extraterrestrials are literally us in some arcane sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think, this obviously looks into a number of controversial areas, but the main thrust is that, I think we might not necessarily see these entities for what they are and understand them because we put our own blinkered notions on them, as you sort of just alluded to. The idea that if aliens are coming here, they have a hierarchy, they have a captain, they have a lieutenant, they have the radar guy, the guy who fires the missiles at the planet, that sort of thing, you know what I mean? It's kind of like, that's so simplistic and almost sort of in line with the contactee thinking of the 50s, somebody meets Space Commander Zach from planet whatever. And I understand that for some people, the simplistic approach works and they portray the phenomenon in a way that they can understand and relate to. But if this phenomenon is so truly weird, we don't even understand it, but we don't possibly even recognize it when we see it for what it is, then we're in big trouble. And the whole idea that the phenomenon isn't what it seems, what I don't understand is why it's so threatening. Why is it people who support the ETH are so threatened by the idea that there could be another theory, equally fantastic, equally amazing if it was proven, but it just didn't mean that aliens from another world weren't visiting? I truly don't understand why that is a threat, other than the fact that it destroys their belief system.
And I think, it's such a marginal. Mac writes about how ufology has collectively, at least the ETH aspects of it, have collectively marginalized themselves. And he sort of posits that they've done it on purpose. And to me, it's kind of like, and Mac was a huge fan of REM, and he and I would talk about this. I remember REM when they were sort of this cool little college band that nobody knew about, unless you happened to be in college. And then they hit the mainstream. They broke, I think it was The One I Love, and then It's the End of the World as We Know It. And suddenly everybody was listening to them. The same thing happened with U2. And the weird thing is, a lot of their cool college fans said, oh, well, they've A, sold out, and B, they were jealous that all of a sudden all these people kind of wanted to listen to REM and U2 because REM and U2 were their bands. And I sometimes wonder, and I think Mac hints at this in his book, that ufology, especially the extraterrestrial hypothesis people, are a lot like that too. They think they're in on the secret. The pearl, as the religious people would call it. And I think there's an element of fear that if everybody starts to be interested in this, to think about it, to talk about it, they're not going to be terribly relevant anymore.